We had a function where we had 10 people on the succession plan when I got there, 10. And every one of them was a stretch. The honest answer was, we do not have a successor in this role. And then once we said that out loud, we could actually build the plan. Until we said that out loud, we couldn't. So we came up with, okay, we're going to upgrade below the leader. We're going to create one runway. Then we're going to upgrade the C-suite. We were able to then go and execute those plans. If you don't tell the truth, you never get to that work. Hey there, senior leader, and welcome to the Talent Triple Podcast. This is where senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. I'm your host, Jackson Lynch, and today I am joined by my co-host, Scott Morris. He's a former CHRO with a scar tissue to prove it, a possible former backup dancer in a regional car dealership commercial, and the founder of Propulsion AI. And Scott, we're going to make some people very uncomfortable today. Succession planning. We're going to talk about it. Every company does it. I've even written that it's one of the most important deliverables a CHRO has. Every CHRO presents it to the board, but we're going to kind of unpack it because most of it's theater. And I say that as someone who's produced more than my fair share of binders.
Yes, the digital age. Before we dive in, though, Jackson, do us a favor, everybody. Subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a comment. Drop us a quick review. You can do it on whichever platform is your preferred platform. That's how we grow the pod and we keep the content sharp for senior leaders. It's a small favor you can do for us and maybe a big favor you do for somebody else.
That's exactly right. And let's dive into this, Scott. Every CHRO has heard this. Succession planning is critical. It's a board imperative. You need a deep bench. And we all nod in agreement. We produce all the decks. We update the 9-box. We have the annual talent review. But here's the thing. I spent years back in my formative HR life at Nestle producing dozens of binders full of people planning materials. And rarely did we ever actually talk in specifics about what the person needed to demonstrate. Instead, we talked about vague comfort and personal desires and readiness, whatever the heck that means. And it's not just at Nestle. I've seen it at every company since when I've joined. I've been in rooms where there are literally 10 people on the succession plan for a function. Like 10. It was B players grading C players and seeing A players. And everyone in the room knew that it was theater. And yet we went along with the game. So Scott, have you ever sat in a talent review where you thought, we all know this isn't real, right?
I think my first instinct was to say like every single one. And I don't know if it's that extreme, but yeah, a lot of them. But here's the thing, beyond what you and I think about this or what you and I have experienced personally, the data confirms that it's not just us. 2024, Jackson, Heidrick & Struggles did a survey of over 3,000 CEOs and board members, and 57% of them said that they were not confident that their succession planning process positioned them well for the future. Think about that. I mean, these are the people that are responsible for it, and more than half of them don't believe that it's really working. Now, contributing to that, winter of 2024, the Fortune and Deloitte CEO survey found that only 31% of CEOs strongly agreed that they had a strong slate of viable future CEO candidates. Half were unsure or disagreed. And a decade ago, Deloitte found that 86% of leaders thought that succession planning was urgent and important, but only 14% of them thought that they did it well. Nothing suggests that that gap is closed. So my question back to you is, why does this persist? If everybody knows it's theater, to borrow your word from a minute ago, why do we keep performing?
Because it feels productive. Like you're producing the deck, you're having the meeting, you're updating the 9-box, and it feels like work. It feels like governance. But it's, as we talked about here before, activity without outcomes. And the cost of it is absolutely staggering. It's a little dated, 2021, but Harvard Business Review analysis estimated that poor succession planning destroys close to $1 trillion a year among the S&P alone. $1 trillion. That's not an HR problem. That is a capital allocation failure. And that's not even what gets me the most. Here's that number. 30 to 50% of executives do not make it 18 months from their promotion. That's 2024 Center for Creative Leadership data. And 68%, and this is a 2018 Egon Zehnder survey, they admit that they were not prepared for the job. So our succession plans are not preparing people for the roles that they're going into. Like, what exactly are we planning for?
Like, this is a little tongue in cheek, but honestly, I think we're preparing for the meeting. We're preparing for the board presentation. We're not preparing for the actual risk event. And here's the thing that makes it all make sense. I think the vagueness kind of serves everybody's interests. It lets the manager avoid hard conversations. It lets those of us in HR kind of check a compliance box. And it lets executives avoid accountability for actual development. Who in that boardroom benefits from specificity?
Yeah, nobody. And like I've been a part of organizations where I literally had a robust succession plan when I arrived, and then the person left. And instantly we realized nothing on the page was part of the plan. And you just wonder why it is that we haven't interrogated that sooner. I think it's probably because specificity creates accountability. And accountability is uncomfortable because you actually have to say, I have a person in my C-suite that has 6 direct reports and not one of them is ready to step into the role. And they don't want to have that conversation, so they don't.
Okay, so we've now kind of named the thing. Let's call out a couple of the faulty assumptions that tend to get leaders stuck. Why don't you kick us off with the first one?
Okay, the one that I hear most often is we have a succession plan. And we say this, but what we really have is a list of names. And a list is not a plan. A plan requires criteria and assessment relative to that criteria, gap closure, movement, a forcing mechanism of some kind. The assumption is that if you have names on a chart that we're prepared for transition, but that's not true. A name without a development plan it's hopium. It's not a plan. And hope is not a strategy for a $50 million salary decision, which over the course of years is exactly what we're talking about for most senior level C-suite roles.
I think one of my least favorite statements that gets connected in this process is they're going to be ready in 1 to 2 years. I don't even know how anybody assesses that. And we put that out there, but what does that mean? Ready for what? And based on what criteria? Where have they demonstrated? Here's what I think the faulty assumption is, Jackson, that somehow the time and role equals some kind of readiness, or that exposure equals some kind of capability. And to the point that you kind of touched on in the point that you raised, that is just not true. Because the reality is that readiness isn't a calendar function. It's a confidence function. And confidence requires some sort of evidence, which requires some sort of standard, not just elapsed time.
I'm right there with you. In fact, we probably don't need to talk about any other assumptions, but let me do it anyway, because I think the one that you just talked about is so spot on. But here's another one. And that's I've done this work before, so I can do it anywhere. And that is usually what candidates tell themselves and what hiring managers want to believe, and what the board, in looking at this, said, well, they've done this kind of a role in this type of a company before, so they can do it here. But I would argue that context really matters. Skills transfer not quite as cleanly as we believe across different contexts. Like, I'd be a really good CHRO in one type of company and an awful one in a different one. And that says more about the context than it says about me, right? So the specific interaction of strategy, culture, and where the company is in that moment, I think that defines whether a leader succeeds. And that's why the Development Dimensions International research shows 50%-ish of external executive hires fail in the first 18 months. That would suggest that there's something other than that person who is previously really successful is driving that, don't you think?
Yeah, because it doesn't transfer. And by the way, I've been that CHRO, successful in one context and then not so successful in a different context. And the skills didn't change, the knowledge didn't change, the approach didn't change, right? The context did. I think I'm going to correct myself. I said the 1 to 2 years was kind of my pet peeve one, but I think this is my real pet peeve, that we review these plans annually, that we create a succession plan and then we review it annually, and we treat it like it's an audit. and not some kind of living document or living register. Once a year thing is not risk management, it's compliance, and we gravitate toward that. Here's the assumption is that the annual review is going to keep the plan current and actionable. But the reality is that the talent markets move faster than annual cycles, and competitors recruit our people in real time. And I think the big miss on this, when we fall into that faulty assumption, is that we should be treating it like a tabletop exercise and not some kind of binder on a shelf. And if we're going to look for a really good example, there's one out there. And I think our colleagues in IT should get a lot of credit for this one. Because if you look at how they manage cybersecurity risk, that's kind of the gold standard. They don't treat that like something that they're reviewing on an annual basis. Never say, we reviewed the threat landscape in Q3, so, we're all good, right? But that's exactly how a lot of leaders treat critical leadership positions. Why do you think we accept that? I mean, to the degree that you agree with me, which I'm hoping you do.
I do. And it's candidly because we have the muscle memory that comes with this kind of performative act. It feels like we're doing the right things, right? And there's a governance element to it as well, because it's tied into the board calendar on a specific time. Usually in public companies, they do that work consistently, and you only have to do it once a year. But that's where our compliance lens, I think, gets us in trouble. Just because we review it with the board due to governance standards once a year doesn't mean that is how frequently we should take the binder off the shelf and look at it. It is a ongoing, living, breathing. And one of the challenges of, from my view, the current succession planning approach is there's no forcing function. Like, you could do this plan, if someone doesn't leave, nothing happens for the next year. And so you can kind of get pulled back into a feeling of false comfort, I think. From an HR perspective, here's the cold hard truth. Nobody gets fired for doing what everybody else does. So the risk of being different feels higher than the risk of being ineffective. And I've actually had to try to build some of these things out. And one of the challenges is getting everyone else aligned, and they intuitively get it and they agree. But in the battle for calendar space, it just feels like, well, why are we doing this? And I would argue it's because we're not actually managing risk appropriately, especially if we have a change and we don't follow the dang plan.
And the urgent always crowds out the important. And there's some kind of urgent priority for us as CHROs. There's an urgent set of priorities for the COO, for the CFO. There's no executive that really gets a pass on that one.
I agree, Scott. But before we get to what we do about this, I want to name the thing underneath everything. And because again, if we don't understand how we got here, I think we would build some new workarounds on top of old workarounds. And I think we talked about this last week. Why does succession planning become theater?
I think that's the right question to be asking. And in my opinion, it's because we start with a list of names. Every succession planning process that I've ever been a part of, that's where everybody gravitates to. We start with names instead of outcomes. We start with who's going to be available rather than what is required. And once you start with names, the whole conversation becomes about defending those names and arguing the nuances of what those people bring to the table rather than defining what the role actually needs. I don't know whether you've ever noticed how quickly talent reviews tend to turn into performance reviews of the people that are on the list that we're talking about.
I think every single time, and it's backwards. I almost had to use the Oldsmobile horn on that one. Think about the order of operations in most companies. Step 1, list the critical roles. Step 2, list the people who might fill them. Step 3, rate those people on potential and performance. But what's missing there?
It's what good looks like in the new role. We never define the outcomes first. And without that, how do you even know if somebody's ready?
Yeah, exactly, Scott. And we end up skipping the hardest part, and that's defining the outcomes, the capabilities, the specific things that we need to see demonstrated before we would bet the business on this person. And if I had $1 for every time I had an argument about 18 to 24 months versus 24 to 36 months without ever talking about what needs to happen during that time period, like I'd be a rich man. And ultimately, it's because I think we skip that whole process that the rest of the exercise becomes vibes. Like she's a strong operator. He has good executive presence. She's well respected. They have great hair. Like none of that stuff matters because it doesn't tell whether they can actually do the job.
It doesn't, but you know what? This is an easy trap to fall into, and I've got to tell you. I mean, I know I have fallen into it many, many times myself. I have sat in those reviews, and I've nodded along with vague assessments, and I think about how many times I've let good potential or whatever other term you just used, pass without asking potential for what specifically.
Yeah, same here. And the uncomfortable truth is, that vagueness serves everybody. It lets the manager avoid a hard conversation. It lets HR check the box. It lets the executive avoid accountability for actual development. If you want to actually do something, it has to be uncomfortable.
Right. So how do we break that loop? Because it sounds like everybody that we're talking about is complicit. Managers, us in HR, executives. Who actually has the incentive to change all of this?
Well, I think it's got to be the CHRO. Don't you?
I mean, we lead a lot of these things, and because we've got really smart CHROs listening to us, let's go with that.
If they are willing to be the one that says, this is not real, by starting in a different place, like not who is available, but what is required, not readiness, but demonstrated capability, and not potential, but the specific gaps in the experiences needed to close them. Like all of that, I think, Scott, is the mindset shift. And it requires courage because no one is really doing it that way. And when you change something that people feel comfortable with, you're going to make them feel uncomfortable. That is a sign usually you're doing the right thing.
All right, so let's get us moved from succession theater to actual risk management around talent and succession. I know, and one of the things that I really have learned from you that I really like is the framework that you call 1x2x4. Give us the primer on that.
Yeah, I think it's really simple. And for every critical role, that's the one, you need a role that's clearly defined. You should have 2 people who are 1 job away and 4 people who are 2 jobs away. Notice I didn't talk about timing at all there. That's how you define your succession depth. The numbers are the easy part. The hard part is what sits underneath those ascension plans.
So it's good that you bring up that word because I learned this from you, actually. I had always called what I did succession planning, and I learned that what I was really doing was ascension planning. Now, the critical point here to make is for anybody that wants to conflate that term with development plan, those are different things. Ascension plans and development plans, very different.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're completely different. A development plan says, here are some things you need to work on whenever you have a free minute. Don't worry, we're going to look at it in a year and we're going to change a few words and numbers. An ascension plan is different. It says, here is exactly what we need to see demonstrated. Here is the experience that will test it. And here is ultimately where we're going to give you that experience. Because again, think back in the broader piece. What we're looking for is, here's the new job. Here's what I need the outcome deliverables to be. I am trying to gauge the candidate relative to my comfort and confidence that they can actually execute those. And so you are putting people in positions and opening holes for them in the organization so that they can actually demonstrate what allows you to be comfortable. That's totally different from 18 to 24 months. So how do you do it? Let me take the first piece of it. I think this is going to be shocking to anyone who's listened to the first 114, but you should define the outcomes first. You should not put a single name on a succession plan. Define what the role requires, not the job description, the outcomes. Define what success looks like in the first 18 months at a very detailed level. And then I think you can also look and say what capabilities are non-negotiable. One of them ought to be building strong teams. And then you should also consider what is the strategic context the position will inherit. Because think about a sales role in a established market versus a greenfield market. Everything else might be the same, but those two contexts lead to a very different profile that would step into the role. So I think this is the step that everybody skips. They assume that the role is defined and that everyone knows what that means and that everyone is probably doing a good job in that. But talent portfolio optimization that I'm trying to push through, it challenges all of those assumptions because I think they're fundamentally untrue. If you skip the step, everything else downstream is bogus.
As I'm sitting here listening to you, I think a lot of us, we think about this as a promotion exercise. And we want to promote people that have potential. And we want to promote people that we like. And we want to promote people because we give them different, titles. But it's promotion with a purpose if it's done right. And that purpose is to achieve something for the organization. So not only do you have to define the outcomes, which is the point you were just making, but then you have to assess the people against the criteria and not, to borrow the word that we used before, vibes, right? Once you've defined what the outcomes are that role needs to provide, then you need to look at the candidates and you need to assess them against those outcomes. That becomes your specific criteria. Not she's a high performer. It may be true, but it's not necessarily relevant to this context. Not he's got strong potential. Again, be 100% true. But the good assessment is, here are the 7 things we need, and here's our confidence level on each one of those 7 things based on evidence that we see from this person. That's assessing them against their potential to do that job, and that's going to set us up for the other pieces. You end up with a really clear picture, right? These 4 things I'm confident about. These 2 things I think we need to see more evidence demonstrated, and this one thing over here we just don't have any data.
Yeah, that clarity, I think, changes everything because now you know exactly what you're testing for. So, Scott, how many times have you actually seen a development plan that says increase collaboration or strategic thinking? Like, what the heck does that even mean? How do you test?
But both of those are incredibly hard to see unless you're there day to day. And it's not that you can't do it, but it's insanely hard. And I think that's actually, that kind of is a lead in. That's really the next piece we need, isn't it?
I think so. And it's where the ascension plan comes together. So for each gap, you name the experience that would give you confidence in that candidate being prepared to step in and deliver those outcomes. It's not she needs more strategic exposure. Okay, go to a meeting. Like, that's not a development. Instead, it's like she needs to lead an acquisition integration, or he needs to manage a restructuring. And then I think this is critical. Even if you have someone that is in a role today that would otherwise be doing that, you move them out of the way and you move these people in to give them the experience. That's the portfolio optimization piece. You don't wait for the experiences to happen organically. You engineer them. And I think that's the biggest difference for me between succession planning and ascension planning, is that there's a forcing mechanism and you act on it. You don't just put it on the shelf and hope you don't have to use it.
And we were talking earlier about why these things don't happen. And I think one of the things that we missed in that part of the conversation, Jackson, is that has consequences. If I say I'm going to move somebody out of this role so I can move somebody in to get that experience, that has consequences, right? You have to make a hard choice in order to do it. Let me hit a 4th one here. And I think this one's going to be a little bit unpopular, although we kind of do that on this pod. Maybe you should take this one. I think people like you better than they like me. So you do the unpopular one.
So it's unpopular and you want to give it to me. Sure. You only live once.
Hey, man, you're the guy that the audience.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Flattery will get you everywhere. Here it is, guys. You ready? You need to actually tell the truth. You have to be honest. And that includes saying, I do not have an internal successor. I've worked with enough CHROs over the last 10 years to know this is where they tend to flinch, because they see it as some sort of personal failing. It's not. Sometimes you actually don't have a viable candidate. And the move is not to pretend that you do. The move is to say it clearly and then do something about it. Like, that means knowing 3 people at your competitors who you would want to recruit if the role were to open up. It means like having relationships with search firms and making sure that you're acutely aware of what's happening in the market. It means building the de-risk plan before you need it. So real life story here. I was a CHRO. We had a function where we had 10 people on the succession plan when I got there, 10. And every one of them was a stretch. The honest answer was, we do not have a successor in this role. And then once we said that out loud, we could actually build the plan. Until we said that out loud, we couldn't. So we came up with, okay, we're going to upgrade below the leader. We're going to create one runway. Then we're going to upgrade the C-suite. We were able to then go and execute those plans. If you don't tell the truth, you never get to that work.
You know, the honesty drives the action there, doesn't it? Right? That's the unlock, because the moment you stop pretending, that's when you start to create a burning platform. But let me ask you this. How did that land with the CEO or with the board when you said to them, we don't have a successor, even though you had 10 people that were on the list for that role? Did that feel like a failure?
You're right, Scott. It didn't land well at first at all, because no one wanted to face that they had been overseeing something that had a glaring flaw in it. I get it, but continuing to pretend isn't the right answer to that. What you need to do is create the de-risk plan. And for us, like I said, we upgraded below the leader, created the runway, then upgraded the C-suite leader, then we finished it out. And so the year before, there were 10 people on the succession plan for that function, and nothing was happening. There were no actions being taken. By being honest about who was not ready, we actually got about the work of doing something. And we by the way, we measure this in talent density in this particular function. The list of 10 names, I think, actually creates some level of complacency. An honest, we don't have one, creates the urgency that you need to move.
Let me shift us to the next one, Jackson. And this one comes from information security. I mentioned it earlier. I think they're brilliant on this. Security teams run tabletop exercises. They simulate breach scenarios. And what I'm talking about is like, it's 2 a.m. on a Saturday, and we've detected some ransomware on our systems. They walk through the incident response. Who gets the first call? What's the escalation path? Who makes the decision to shut down the systems? Who communicates to the board, to customers, to regulars? What's legal's role? They stress test the protocols, the communication chains, the handoffs between teams, and they look for gaps and unclear ownership. And I think we should do the same thing. Like, think about the CFO position, right? Your CFO is resigning. They did it this morning. The quarterly earnings call is in 6 days. Walk me through it. Who takes over the investor call? Who runs the finance team day to day? Who communicates to the board? What decisions get paused? How can you run with an interim before you need a permanent, right? Does fill in the blank really get the job? Who leaves? Who fumes? Who engages? And when someone hesitates, you dig in. What's causing that hesitation? What do we not know? What's unclear? That's, I think, how you find the real gaps. It's not a spreadsheet. It's in the simulation. And it involves tough questions that make people uncomfortable.
Yeah, I have led that exercise inside companies. I've helped CHROs lead those exercises. It always comes out different from what you anticipated when you're walking into it. And I think the broad approach, and where did I get this idea? It's not mine. It's Mark Efron's over at One Page Talent Management. He calls it simplicity, accountability, and transparency. So you strip out the complexity that doesn't add value. You focus on the ready now successors, and you be transparent about what you actually know versus what you don't. So I think for me, the real question is, are CHROs willing to stop being binder producers and start being risk managers? And like, are they ready to have that uncomfortable conversation about who's not ready? And that's the important part. I think we probably hammered this enough at this point. Let's maybe shift and talk about what a CHRO can do starting this week. I think step one would be pick a critical role, define the outcomes before the names, put down the 5 outcomes that define success for the first 18 months. Don't look at your current succession plan until you've done it. And then compare, do the names on the list actually map to the outcomes that you need?
Yeah, and you know what? This is about muscle memory. So I think you've kicked us off with the right one. Do a small version of it. Start to feel what it feels like. Here's what I would say is number 2. For your top 3 succession candidates, list what you're confident about and what you need to see demonstrated. No vague language. I'm confident she can build a team. I need to see her manage P&L in a downturn. I have no data on her ability to influence the board. Be specific.
Yeah, and those ought to be linked back to the clarity of the outcomes of the role that you're talking about, and it's binary, right? It's either I'm confident or I'm not, and if you're not, then that moves, I think, to step three: identify one experience that you can engineer in the next 90 days. It doesn't have to be a complete organizational reshuffle, but it also shouldn't be we need to get her more exposure. Pick a specific assignment, name the date, make the move. It was working inside a company where we had a 30-day focusing on product engineering, and we created these pods, and we had cross-functional leaders in the pods. That's a wonderful opportunity to give people an opportunity to demonstrate things that you will need to see to have confidence in whether or not they're moving. Development, I guess, the takeaway for me on that is development happens through movement. It's not just intention, and it's certainly not vague language.
Well, and the word that you didn't use in that is process. It's a process. This ascension is a process of getting them the experience that lets you reduce your uncertainty about whatever the factors are. Let me hit number 4. For one role on your succession plan, honestly assess whether you have a viable internal candidate. And if the answer is no, then you got to say that out loud. Then identify 3 external targets who you would recruit and start building relationships.
If, as a sitting CHRO, you don't know the people who are the peers of your C-suite in your biggest competitors, now's the time to start doing that work, because those ought to be the ones that you call first. You may not be able to get them, but if you know them, then you can also get a sense for the talent on their team. And maybe this is a unique opportunity to go get the assistant coach when you're looking to fill the coordinator position, even though you can't get the coordinator to come over, right? I think the number 5 play that I would run is the tabletop exercise. You talked about it before. I talked about it before. But here's maybe the switch. Start with baby steps, with all love and admiration to Bill Murray and that great movie, What About Bob? Start with baby steps. I pick the CFO and say, okay, boss, the CFO resigned this morning. I want you to walk me through the first week and what are we going to do? And to your earlier point, you got to look for that hesitation. And if you see it, you got to dig in. That discomfort is the data. And I've done this, and it's what unlocks action, because otherwise okay, I got names on the count. Are you really putting any of these 10 people into the top job if the person leaves? No. Great. Like now we know we need to do something.
And I think to as a sort of corollary to that point, here would be the last of the action steps is get one name on the succession plan off the succession plan if they don't really belong there. And to the story that you told earlier, it's kind of the hardest one because you have to call it out. But every name that shouldn't be on that list dilutes the credibility of the entire exercise. I think fewer names, more honesty, and more action are way better than the alternatives.
You're exactly right, but it's scary to be really.
It sounds scary.
Yeah. Removing a name feels like you've admitted a failure, or it because most people aren't going to go back and say I was wrong before. So they're going to lock in and say I was right last year, and now I've taken them off, and now I've admitted a failure. But and maybe that is how it makes people feel. I don't know. I don't have that emotional gene.
But you know something, Jackson, if people listen to the earlier pieces of advice that we gave about thinking about outcomes and not people, then I think the exercise gets a lot easier. We're not saying the person's a bad person. We're not saying they don't have potential. We're saying we don't see the evidence that they can ascend into that role, and we want to help them get it, and they can't be on the list until they have it, or at least we're confident at a certain level.
Yeah, you phrase that in a much better way. I would just say, look, we know the person shouldn't be on the list. We're going to take them off the damn list. If you keep them on the list, that's the actual failure, not taking them off. That's, if you don't do that, you end up with 10 people on a succession plan with absolutely no real successor.
And you're back in theater.
Yeah. Okay. Senior leaders, this is the time of our podcast where, as you know, we get the Talent Sherpa summary. And as Scott always says, like he says it almost every day, the best succession plan is a laminated binder that no one has ever opened up, at least not since the last board meeting.
I've literally never said that, but I love lamination. Here are the takeaways. Succession planning without defined outcomes is just theater. You got to start with what the role requires and not with who's available and who you want on that list. Number 2, readiness is a confidence function. It's not a calendar function. It's not about time. You need evidence, not just elapsed time doing something. Number 3, ascension plans beat development plans. You got to specify the gaps between where the person is and what the role requires. You've got to name the experiences that you want to help them to get, and then you've got to engineer that movement. Last of the 4, honesty creates urgency. When you don't have an internal successor for a role, say it. That's where the real work begins, because it unlocks what you're going to do internally and what you're going to do externally.
Yeah, the takeaway for me on this is this. The value of succession planning isn't the plan. It's the conversation the plan forces you to have, the specificity it demands, and the honesty it requires. So if we want to elevate the altitude of human capital, we need to stop producing binders that add no value. You need to start managing risk, and you do that with a forcing function that requires you to act, not require you to hope you don't have to act. And that's it for this week. I want to say thank you so much for tuning into the Talent Sherpa podcast. It is where, as you know, senior leaders come to rethink how human capital really works. And this is so much fun to do with you all. I want to give a quick shout out to one of our favorite listeners, Christine in New York, New York. Thank you for being a part of the Talent Sherpa community. And we want to thank everyone for listening, whether that is in Calgary, Alberta, or Bengaluru in, well, it's Karnataka. Boy, that's the downside of having an international show. I need to do a better job of being able to pronounce some of the names of these cities. But that's, for those who don't know, that's like a big India tech hub. I just want to say it's great to have you listening. Sorry for butchering the name of your city.
If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and take a second right now, hit the like button, or even better yet, please subscribe to the podcast. Leave us a review on your favorite platform, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube. We are ubiquitous across all of them. It would benefit the community if you would take a moment and leave us a review. That is what activates the algorithm, and it's what shares the pod with other senior leaders. It's free. It would be a small favor to us, but potentially a big favor to other people.
Yeah, we have like 10,000 listeners and 6 reviews. So something tells me that if we could even get a handful of you to take the couple minutes to do it, it's going to help us grow the pod even bigger. And if you're a sitting CHRO or a CEO wondering, where do you start your AI journey? I want to encourage you to check out getpropulsion.ai. They're running a team of AI teammates that help human capital leaders focus on what matters most to the business. Scott, what do you guys help people with?
We use artificial intelligence coaches to help translate value creation plans into actual EBITDA.
Yeah.
Don't forget, if you are an early stage or a new CHRO, Jackson has been helping people just like you through personal coaching, through the CHRO Ascent Academy, and through his best-selling Substack. You can find access to all of those over at My Talent Sherpa.
Thanks, Scott. And thank you to everyone who's listening. Until next time, keep raising the bar, keep focusing on real talent outcomes, and keep on climbing.